The morning light slipped through the thin curtains of a small apartment on the east side of the city, touching the scattered brushes, half-finished canvases, and coffee-stained sketchbooks that spoke of a life built quietly rather than loudly. Natalie Reed stood in front of a cracked mirror, adjusting a borrowed blazer that didn't quite fit her narrow shoulders. The faint scent of paint clung to her hands no matter how often she scrubbed them, a reminder of the world she belonged to, a world of color, community, and children whose laughter filled the rooms of the Riverside Community Center, where she taught art. She had never imagined that a single morning could throw her so far from that comfort into a place of glass, power and marble. Her sister Monica had always been the bold one, the one who knew how to make an entrance and keep every pair of eyes fixed on her. Where Natalie faded into the corners of rooms Monica commanded them the night before, Monica had attended another of her glamorous networking events, the kind filled with people who smelled of money and ambition. She had returned home at dawn, her voice hoarse, her makeup still perfect but her energy gone, and as soon as Natalie heard the muffled groan from her sister's room, she knew trouble was coming. Monica appeared in the doorway, dramatic even in exhaustion, one hand on her forehead, the other clutching a folder thick with papers. "Nat, please, I can't make it downtown today. There's a meeting at the Cross Hotel headquarters. Just a document drop-off, 20 minutes at most. Please just pretend to be me." Natalie blinked, the words settling like stones in her stomach. She was not made for skyscrapers or boardrooms. She belonged to laughter, crayons, and paint under her nails. But Monica's pleading eyes were hard to refuse. They had always balanced each other, Natalie the quiet caretaker, Monica the dreamer who burned bright and fast. "What if they ask questions I can't answer?" Natalie murmured. Gripping the folder as if it might anchor her, Monica waved a manicured hand. "Just smile, act confident, drop it off. Nobody will care. These people only see results, not faces." An hour later, Natalie found herself standing in front of a tower that seemed to scrape the clouds. The Cross Hotel Corporation building gleamed in the sunlight, its walls made of mirrored glass reflecting the city's pulse back upon itself. Inside, everything smelled of expensive cologne and polished stone. Her worn flats made soft sounds against the marble floors as she crossed the lobby, trying not to stare at the massive chandelier that looked more like frozen rain than crystal. The elevator carried her upward with dizzying speed until the doors opened onto the 42nd floor, where silence reigned like a law. A receptionist with flawless posture directed her to a heavy oak door etched with a name that carried weight across continents. Julian Cross, Chief Executive Officer. Natalie took a slow breath, knocked gently, and almost hoped no one would answer, but a deep voice called, "Come in." Julian Cross stood by the window, tall and composed, the skyline stretching behind him like a crown. He looked younger than she expected, early 30s perhaps, but carried himself with the stillness of someone used to command. When he turned, the light caught the steel gray of his eyes, steady, observant, a color that could have been cold if not for the quiet weariness behind it. "Miss Carter," he said, walking toward his desk. "Please, have a seat." Natalie froze, the name striking her like a bell. Miss Carter, Monica Carter. Her lips parted to correct him, but her voice tangled with nerves. She lowered herself into the chair, clutching the folder like a shield. "I should explain," she said finally, her tone gentle but trembling. "I'm not actually Monica Carter. I'm her sister, Natalie. She wasn't feeling well, so I came to bring the partnership documents." For a heartbeat, he said nothing. Then his expression changed, the sharp edges of authority softening into something closer to curiosity. He leaned back slightly, his gaze studying her face with quiet intensity. "You're not what I expected," he murmured. "Tell me, Natalie, do you always go where you're not comfortable just because someone asks you to?" The question caught her off guard. She hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Sometimes we go where we're needed, not where we fit," she said. "That's what family means." He stood and moved to the window again, hands clasped behind his back. "You know, in this building, everyone rehearses. They measure every word before speaking. They come to gain something, yet you walked in frightened and told me the truth. That's rare." He turned toward her, the sunlight outlining his profile. "Your sister is talented, but you're honest." The words sank into her chest like warmth she hadn't expected. He gestured for her to join him by the window. Hesitant, she rose and approached. The view stretched endlessly, glass, steel, and motion. "I built all this," he said quietly. "Hotels in 30 countries. My name printed on towers and linen. But sometimes I wonder what any of it means if every face I meet is wearing a mask. Natalie listened, surprised by the note of loneliness in his voice. The world had painted billionaires as unreachable, cold, but in that moment he seemed like a man standing inside a glass cage of his own making. She found herself saying softly, "Maybe masks aren't always for hiding lies. Sometimes they're for hiding fear." He looked at her then, truly looked, and for the first time in years Julian Cross felt something shift inside him, something unfamiliar. The meeting that should have lasted 10 minutes stretched into an hour of unexpected conversation. They spoke not about business but about art, purpose, and the smallness of human happiness compared to ambition. When she finally handed him the folder, he didn't immediately reach for it. "You paint," he said suddenly, noticing a faint streak of blue near her cuff. She flushed. "Yes, with children mostly. Community projects." He smiled slightly. "That explains the honesty." When she left the office, her heart was racing. She told herself it was just nerves. But part of her knew it was something else, something dangerous in its newness. As the elevator descended, she exhaled shakily, clutching the folder, now lighter, against her chest. The city outside looked different now, brighter somehow. Julian stood at his window long after she'd gone. The documents lay untouched on his desk. For years he had met hundreds of polished faces, heard thousands of perfect pitches, yet he couldn't remember the last time someone had looked so terrified and still told the truth. There was something about her sincerity, her quiet courage, and that refused to leave his thoughts. That night, Natalie returned to her tiny apartment, Monica already awake and scrolling through messages on her phone. "How did it go?" Monica asked casually without looking up. "Did you drop the papers?" Natalie nodded. "Yes." "And he spoke to me." Monica finally looked up, eyes wide. "He spoke to you, as in Julian Cross." Natalie nodded again, a small, uncertain smile touching her lips. "He thought I was you at first, but when I told him the truth, he didn't seem angry. He just listened." Monica frowned slightly, something unreadable flickering behind her expression. "That's interesting," she said slowly. "He never has time for people. Not even investors." Natalie said nothing, not wanting to explain the way his voice had lingered in her mind. She changed into her paint-stained clothes and spent the evening finishing a mural sketch. But no matter how much color she added to the paper, her thoughts drifted back to those gray eyes watching her from a glass tower. Across the city, Julian sat in his penthouse study, the city lights glittering beneath him. His assistant had reminded him of a dozen meetings, yet his mind kept returning to that moment when she'd said, "Sometimes we go where we're needed, not where we fit." He found himself typing her name into the partnership file. "Natalie Reed," he whispered to himself, tasting the sound of it. It had been a long time since a name had felt that alive, and somewhere deep inside both of them, without either realizing it, something quiet and unstoppable had begun. A thread of connection spun by accident, strengthened by honesty, and destined to pull two very different lives together in ways neither of them could yet imagine. The next few days passed in a quiet blur, yet beneath the surface something restless began to stir inside Natalie. She returned to her art classes at the community center, painting alongside children who filled the walls with color and joy. But every so often she caught herself drifting, remembering the way Julian Cross had looked at her, not as a stranger who didn't belong, but as someone he had actually seen. She told herself it meant nothing, that he probably forgot her name the moment she left his office. Still, the memory lingered like the faint echo of a melody she couldn't quite stop humming. The children noticed her softer smile. Grace, a little girl who always smeared paint across her cheeks, asked innocently if Miss Natalie had met a prince. Natalie laughed and shook her head, saying that real life wasn't a fairy tale. Yet deep down she wondered if fate sometimes liked to play its own quiet tricks. Across town, in a world of polished floors and skyline views, Julian sat behind his massive desk but found his mind elsewhere. The numbers on his screen blurred, the phone calls felt mechanical, and every business conversation seemed hollow. He had built his empire on discipline and detachment, yet one brief encounter with an honest young woman had unsettled him more than any financial crisis ever could. That afternoon, as the boardroom doors closed behind another meeting, his assistant handed him a schedule and paused. "Sir, there's the annual charity gala this Friday at the Grand Marquis. You're expected to attend?" Julian nodded absently, then after a moment asked, Do we still have the files from the Riverside Community Center partnership proposal? The assistant blinked in surprise. Yes, but that program was declined last year. Reopen it, he said quietly. And send an invitation to their art instructor, Natalie Reed. Tell her we're reconsidering the sponsorship. When the email arrived that evening, Natalie almost dropped her phone. The message was short and formal. An invitation to attend the Cross Foundation Charity Gala as a guest of honor to discuss future support for her art program. At first she thought it was a mistake, then realized it had been sent directly from the office of Julian Cross himself. Her hands trembled. She read it again and again, unsure whether to feel terrified or thrilled. Monica noticed the look on her face and leaned over her shoulder. The Cross Foundation Gala, she said. Nat, that's huge. Everyone who's anyone will be there. But why would they invite me? Natalie asked softly. I don't belong at things like that. Monica gave a short laugh. Maybe he liked you. Maybe he saw something different. Either way, you can't say no. This could change everything. Friday arrived faster than she expected. Her apartment turned into a chaos of dresses, shoes, and nervous pacing. Monica lent her a gown, soft silver satin that shimmered when the light touched it, and helped style her hair into simple curls. Remember, Monica said as she fastened a delicate necklace around her neck. Confidence, look people in the eye, you have every right to be there. Natalie smiled weakly, but her stomach felt like it was full of wings. When she stepped out of the cab at the entrance of the Grand Marquis, the sight before her took her breath away. The hotel glowed under golden lights. Luxury cars lined the driveway, and photographers flashed cameras as socialites in glittering gowns moved like a river of elegance through the glass doors. Natalie took a slow breath and stepped inside. The ballroom was enormous, chandeliers sparkling like captured starlight, soft classical music filling the air, waiters moving gracefully with trays of champagne. She felt small among the diamonds and tailored suits. Yet there was something inside her that refused to shrink. She remembered the children she taught, the laughter, the way they believed in her, and somehow that gave her courage. Her eyes scanned the room until they found him. Julian stood near the grand staircase, speaking with a group of executives perfectly poised in his black tuxedo. Yet when his eyes met hers, something shifted. His conversation faltered, a rare smile touched his face, and he excused himself from the group, crossing the floor with unhurried steps until he stood before her. You came, he said quietly, his tone more personal than the noise around them. I wasn't sure you would. Natalie smiled nervously. I almost didn't, she admitted. But my sister said it would be rude to decline a billionaire's invitation. He laughed softly. A sound so genuine it surprised them both. Then thank your sister for me, he said. Because I'm glad you're here. He offered his arm, and she hesitated only a second before taking it. Together they walked toward the art display section, where local community projects were showcased. You wanted to discuss sponsorship, she said carefully. Yes, he replied, but more than that. I wanted to understand what drives someone to give so much of themselves to others when there's so little in return. She looked at him, unsure how to answer, then said quietly, because sometimes helping others is the only way to remind ourselves that we matter too. They spoke for a long time, oblivious to the curious glances from others in the room. Her sincerity disarmed him. Her humor made him forget the stiffness of formalities. He found himself laughing more than he had in years, listening rather than commanding. And when the orchestra began to play a slow melody, he offered his hand. May I, he asked. She hesitated, then placed her hand in his. His touch was warm, steady. They moved slowly across the floor, her steps uncertain at first, but guided gently by his. Around them, lights twinkled, conversation blurred. Time seemed to slow into rhythm. For the first time in his life, Julian Cross forgot about control, forgot about appearances. He simply existed in that moment with her. After the dance, they stepped out onto the balcony. The city spread out below like a sea of stars. The air was cooler here, quieter. You know, Julian said softly, leaning against the marble railing. Everyone I meet at these things comes with an agenda. Except you. You came into my office terrified, told the truth, and somehow that honesty has stayed with me. I don't know why. Natalie looked at him, her heart beating faster. Maybe because honesty is rare in your world, she said. And maybe because you needed to hear it. He smiled faintly. Maybe I did. A moment of silence stretched between them. comfortable and fragile all at once. The sounds of music and laughter drifted through the open doors behind them. But out here it was just them. When the evening ended, Julian escorted her to the lobby. "I'll have my driver take you home," he said. "That's not necessary," she replied. "I'll take a cab." He looked at her with gentle insistence. "Please, it would make me feel better." She finally nodded. "All right." As they reached the car, he paused before opening the door. "Natalie," he said softly, "I'd like to visit your community center sometime. If you'll allow it." She blinked in surprise. "You would?" "Yes," he said simply. "I want to see the world that gives you that light in your eyes." She smiled, feeling something warm bloom in her chest. "Then you're welcome anytime." That night, as the car drove her through the quiet streets, she replayed every word, every look, every laugh. She told herself it was nothing, just kindness from a man used to courtesy. But her heart refused to listen. Back in her apartment, Monica was waiting. "So," she asked with a grin, "was he as charming as they say?" Natalie smiled, hanging her dress carefully. "He was different," she said. "Not what I expected." Monica arched an eyebrow. "Different how?" "He listens," Natalie said softly, almost to herself, "and he makes you feel like you matter." Meanwhile, in his penthouse high above the city, Julian stood by his window again, his reflection mingling with the lights beyond. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone in his own empire. He thought about her shy smile, the way she had looked at the world with wonder rather than calculation. He had met countless women, each polished and perfect, yet none had carried the quiet authenticity that Natalie possessed. It unsettled him in the best way possible, and as he poured himself a glass of water, he found himself smiling at his own reflection, wondering what it was about her that felt like the beginning of something he didn't even know he had been waiting for. The next morning, the city awoke to headlines about the gala, photographs of billionaires and celebrities, glittering gowns and charity figures. But tucked among them was one picture that caught Monica's attention. It showed Julian Cross dancing with a woman in silver satin, her expression serene, her eyes lit with something soft and real. Monica's breath caught, jealousy flickering beneath her smile. She stared at the image for a long time, a storm of thoughts whirling behind her calm exterior. While across the room, Natalie hummed softly, completely unaware that the night which had filled her heart with light was about to ripple into complications she could never have imagined. And so began the change neither of them had foreseen. A quiet invitation that had opened a door between two worlds, one built of sincerity, the other of ambition. And though neither could see where that path would lead, fate had already started to weave their stories together into something neither money nor fear could undo. The following week brought with it an unexpected stillness. Yet underneath that calm, the world around Natalie began to shift in quiet, invisible ways. The gala had left behind a glow she could not name, a sense that something fragile and beautiful had awakened between her and Julian. A connection she hadn't meant to create but couldn't seem to ignore. Each day when she went to the community center, she felt her steps lighter, her laughter easier, and though she told no one, she caught herself glancing at her phone every few hours, half hoping, half fearing that his name might appear on the screen. But the days passed in silence, no messages, no calls, only the echo of that night replaying in her heart. Julian, on the other hand, was not silent because he had forgotten, but because he could not stop thinking. The more he thought of her, the more he realized how dangerous that growing pull felt. He had spent years building walls high enough to keep the world at bay. Walls made of rules, discipline, and distance, and now this quiet, honest woman had stepped through them without even trying. In meetings, he caught himself distracted, missing details he never would have missed before. At night, he stood by his window staring at the skyline, wondering why her words, her laughter, her eyes refused to leave his mind. His assistant noticed the change, the way he smiled faintly for no reason, the pauses between his usual precision, and though no one dared to comment, whispers began to move through the office corridors that something or someone had reached the unreachable Julian Cross. One afternoon, unable to resist the pull any longer, he called the Riverside Community Center, his voice calm but his pulse unsteady. When the receptionist told Natalie that Mr. Cross was on the line, she almost dropped the paintbrush in her hand. "Mr. Cross," she said, trying to steady her voice. "I wasn't expecting—" "I know," he interrupted softly. "I hope you don't mind me calling. I wanted to see the center." If the offer still stands, for a moment. She couldn't breathe. Of course, she finally said. The children would be thrilled. He smiled faintly on the other end. Then I'll come tomorrow at 10. The next morning, Natalie arrived early, sweeping the floors, tidying the art supplies and setting out the children's paintings as if preparing for an inspection that mattered more than anything else. When he arrived, even the sunlight seemed to change. He entered the room not as the billionaire in tailored suits, but as a man wearing simple clothes. His sleeves rolled up, the faintest trace of surprise on his face as he took in the colorful chaos. The walls were covered with drawings of hope, smiling suns, bright houses, stick-figure families holding hands, and in the middle of it all, Natalie stood with her apron splattered in paint, her hair tied back, looking more herself than she had at the gala. You weren't joking, he said with a soft laugh. This place really is made of color. And heart, she replied. This is where I see real success, not in buildings or profits, but in smiles. He looked at her for a long moment. You really believe that, don't you? She nodded. I have to. If I didn't, the world would feel too heavy. The children gathered around him, curious about the tall stranger with kind eyes. Natalie introduced him as a friend who helped make dreams possible. One little boy tugged at Julian's hand and asked if he could help paint. To his own surprise, Julian said yes. He knelt on the floor beside them, dipping a brush into bright blue paint, and within minutes his polished hands were smeared with color. The children giggled. Natalie watched from across the room, her heart swelling at the sight of him laughing freely. It was as if he had left his armor at the door and rediscovered the simple joy of being human. After the children had gone home, the two of them stood in the now quiet room, surrounded by the scent of paint and paper. I haven't laughed like that in years, Julian admitted, his voice low. I'd forgotten what it felt like to just beat. Natalie smiled. You hide it well. I had to, he said. In my world, vulnerability looks like weakness. Then maybe it's time to change your world, she replied gently. The words hung between them, soft but powerful. He stepped closer, just enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, but not enough to cross the line. Neither of them was ready to cross. You make it sound easy, he said. It's not, she replied. But it's worth trying. As they stood there, something in his eyes shifted, a flicker of admiration, respect, and something deeper. But before either could speak, her phone buzzed sharply. She glanced at it and her expression changed. It was Monica, the message short and urgent. Call me now. Excusing herself, she stepped outside, her heart beating faster as she dialed. Monica, what's wrong? She asked. You tell me. Her sister's voice came back cold. I saw the papers, Nat, the Cross Foundation partnership, the sponsorship proposal. Your name is everywhere. Do you even know what you've stepped into? Natalie frowned. What are you talking about? Julian Cross? Monica hissed. He doesn't do charity without reason. People like him always want something in return. Don't be naive. The words stung more than she wanted to admit. She ended the call quietly, staring at the city skyline in the distance, part of her wanting to believe in the kindness she had seen, another part remembering her sister's warning. When she went back inside, Julian was gathering his things. Everything all right? He asked. She forced a smile. Yes, just my sister being dramatic. But he could sense the tension. You don't believe I came here for business alone, he said quietly. She hesitated. I don't know what to believe. He stepped closer, his expression unreadable but his tone sincere. Natalie, I didn't come here to take anything from you. I came because I needed to see what you see, to remember what I lost. She met his gaze and saw truth there, but doubt still lingered like a shadow. Maybe, she said softly, or maybe this is just another project for you. His eyes darkened with hurt. You think I'm pretending? I think you're too used to pretending, she said, the words leaving her lips before she could stop them. The silence that followed was heavy. He finally nodded. Maybe you're right, he said quietly, but I meant every word, and when you're ready to see that, you'll know where to find me. With that he left, leaving her standing in the middle of the colorful room that suddenly felt dimmer. Days passed, and though she tried to focus on her work, she couldn't shake the unease. The children noticed her distraction, and even Monica's voice on the phone seemed softer, almost apologetic. I didn't mean to upset you, she said one evening. I just don't want you hurt, Nat. I know men like him. They don't live in our world, Natalie sighed. Maybe that's why he came to mine, she whispered. But even as she said it, she felt the ache of uncertainty. Julian spent those same days in silence, not because he was angry, but because he realized how deeply her words had struck. For years he had hidden behind success, controlled every part of his life, but for the first time he had met someone who saw through it. He found himself walking past the art supply store near her neighborhood one afternoon. Pausing at the window where children's drawings hung for sale, one of them caught his attention. A simple picture of two figures holding hands beneath a painted sun. The names written at the bottom in crayon, Mr. Julian and Miss Natalie. He smiled despite himself, realizing the children had seen what neither of them had yet admitted. A week later, he made a decision. He sent a message through the community center's board, announcing a public art exhibition to be held in collaboration with the Cross Foundation, highlighting the works of underprivileged children and their teachers. When Natalie received the news, she was stunned. The exhibition would not only save the community center's funding, but also bring national attention to their work. Her heart raced as she read the fine print. Julian Cross himself would attend as the chief sponsor. On the night of the exhibition, the air buzzed with excitement. Photographers lined the hallways, families filled the space, and the children's art lit up the gallery walls with color and joy. Natalie stood by the entrance in a simple blue dress, her hands trembling slightly, and when he arrived, dressed in understated elegance, their eyes met across the room. For a moment, all the noise faded. He walked toward her slowly, his expression unreadable but warm. "You didn't have to do all this," she said softly when he reached her. "Yes, I did," he replied. "Because what you're doing here deserves the world's attention." Tears welled in her eyes as applause filled the hall. And for the first time she understood that what he had offered wasn't charity or pity. It was faith. Faith in her, in what she had built, in what she believed. When the event ended, he found her standing by one of the paintings, a portrait of two faceless figures reaching toward light. "It's beautiful," he said quietly. She nodded. "It's about trust," he looked at her and said. "Then maybe we're both still learning how." In that moment, the distance between them faded, not through grand gestures or promises, but through the simple truth that both had begun to change each other. She had taught him how to feel again, and he had shown her that not all power corrupts. Sometimes it redeems. As they stood there surrounded by colors painted by children who believed in magic, Julian realized that for the first time in his life, he was standing exactly where he was meant to be, and beside him was the woman who had unknowingly become the heart he never knew he was missing. The evening of the exhibition had faded into memory, yet its echoes lingered like music that refused to end. The photographs from that night began circulating online. Articles praising the generosity of the Cross Foundation and the beauty of the children's artwork filled business columns and lifestyle pages alike. But to those who were closest to the moment itself, the headlines only told half the story, for behind every camera flash and polite handshake, there had been something quieter and far more real unfolding. The slow, hesitant beginning of love between two souls who came from worlds that had never meant to collide. Julian had returned to his tower of glass and meetings, but something inside him was changing. The usual rhythm of his days, conferences, travel plans, investor calls, and no longer carried the same satisfaction. He had spent a lifetime mastering numbers and strategy, but now his thoughts wandered to paint-stained aprons and laughter echoing in small classrooms. He had tried to bury the feeling under work, yet the memory of her smile kept rising like light breaking through clouds. Every time he caught himself looking out of his office window at the city below, he saw her instead, standing amidst the children she loved, her hands moving with quiet grace, her face illuminated by the kind of joy that could never be bought. For Natalie, life at the community center continued as before, yet she too carried the weight of something she couldn't explain. After the exhibition, she had expected Julian to fade back into his world of luxury and distance, but instead he began to appear in small, unexpected ways. A donation arrived for the center, large enough to secure their next year of programs, followed by art supplies, equipment, and even renovation plans that promised to give the children their first proper gallery space. When she saw the signature on the paperwork, Cross Foundation, her heart swelled with gratitude, but also confusion. She wanted to thank him, yet she didn't know if her voice could hide the emotions that had grown quietly within her. A week later, she received a simple message. "Would you meet me for coffee tomorrow?" It came from Julian's assistant, but she knew the invitation was his. For hours she debated, pacing her small apartment, arguing with her heart. In the end, curiosity and longing won. The next afternoon she walked into a small cafe tucked between old brick buildings downtown. Its quiet charm a sharp contrast to the grand places he usually inhabited. When she arrived, he was already there, sitting by the window. Dressed not in a suit but in a soft gray sweater, looking less like a billionaire and more like a man who had finally learned how to breathe. "You chose this place," she said as she sat down. "I thought you preferred places with chandeliers." He smiled. "I've spent enough time under chandeliers. I wanted something real." They spoke for hours about art, about childhood, about how loneliness can exist even in the most crowded rooms. He told her things no one else knew, about his mother who had painted until illness took her hands, about how he had promised himself never to feel that kind of loss again, about how somewhere along the way he had stopped living and started existing. She listened, her heart softening with every word. When she finally spoke, it was not to comfort him but to tell him the truth. "You've built everything people dream of, Julian, but you forgot to build space for yourself to be human." He looked at her then, really looked, his voice low. "And what if I'm trying now?" She smiled gently. "Then start small, come paint with us again." "The children still talk about you?" He laughed softly. "I think I left a mark on the floor more than anything else." "Maybe," she said with a teasing glance, "but they adored you for it." The days that followed wove them closer together in ways neither intended. Julian began visiting the center regularly, sometimes helping, sometimes just sitting quietly at the back, watching her move among the children like light weaving through color. Natalie started to see the man behind the empire, the way he bent down to listen when a child spoke, the way he smiled when someone handed him a crooked painting, and the way his laughter now came without hesitation. It wasn't the laughter of a man performing for the world. It was the laughter of someone rediscovering pieces of himself he thought were long gone. But not everyone watched with kindness. Monica had grown increasingly restless. She had watched her sister's life transform, watched her name appear in circles Monica had once fought to enter, and jealousy began to eat quietly at the edges of her pride. One afternoon she appeared at the community center unannounced, dressed impeccably as always, her tone light but her eyes sharp. "So," she said as she walked through the painted hallway, "you and Julian Cross seem rather close these days." Natalie blinked in surprise. "He's been helping the center, Monica. That's all." Monica's lips curved in a knowing smile. "Helping? Or something more?" The question sliced deeper than it should have. Natalie turned away. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" Monica pressed, "because from where I'm standing, it looks like my little sister accidentally walked into a world she doesn't belong in, and fell in love with a man who can have anyone." "Stop," Natalie whispered, her voice trembling. "You don't understand him." Monica folded her arms. "I understand men like him perfectly, trust me." That night, Natalie sat on her bed long after the lights went out, her sister's words replaying over and over. A world she doesn't belong in. The fear she had managed to silence for weeks began to creep back, reminding her that love between two unequal worlds rarely ends without pain. She told herself not to dream, not to believe that kindness meant more than courtesy. But the next morning, when Julian walked into the center carrying 2 cups of coffee and that same quiet smile, every wall she had tried to rebuild began to crumble again. He noticed her silence and asked softly, "Something's troubling you." She hesitated, then said, "People are talking. They think I'm foolish for trusting you." His gaze darkened slightly. "And what do you think?" She met his eyes. "I think I don't want to doubt you. But I'm scared." He set the coffees down, stepping closer until his voice lowered to a whisper. "Natalie, I can't promise the world won't judge, but I can promise that I will never let them decide what you mean to me." His words settled like sunlight through storm clouds, warming something inside her that had been cold for too long. And in that moment she understood that whatever challenges lay ahead, he was not the man her sister feared, nor the man the world painted him to be. He was a man who had finally found the courage to care. Still, fate has its own way of testing hearts. A few days later, an article appeared online, a headline twisting their partnership into scandal, claiming favoritism, hinting that Julian's support of the community center was driven by romance rather than philanthropy. Photographers appeared outside the gates, reporters called her phone, and the board of the Cross Foundation began to question him publicly. Julian tried to shield her, but the story spread faster than truth could catch up. Natalie saw the headlines and felt her stomach twist. Everything she had worked for now hanging in the balance of gossip. When she finally saw him again, he looked tired, the weight of reputation pressing hard against him. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have protected you from this." She shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "You did nothing wrong, Julian. Kindness shouldn't be a scandal." "Maybe not," he said bitterly, "but in my world, perception is everything." She took his hand then, surprising them both, then let them perceive the truth. Let them see that compassion isn't weakness. In the days that followed, he fought back, not with anger, but with transparency, holding a press conference where he publicly praised the community center, declaring it a symbol of change, not charity. He spoke about Natalie's work, her courage, and how her belief in simple goodness had reminded him what leadership truly meant. His words silenced the critics. The same reporters who had once whispered now applauded. And as the world began to see them not as scandal but as inspiration, Natalie watched him with tears in her eyes, realizing that love, when it is true, can stand against anything. That evening, after the storm had passed, they met once more on the balcony of the community center, the city stretching endlessly below them. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "I wanted to," he replied. "You changed me, Natalie, and I don't care who knows it." She smiled, the last of her fear fading. "Then maybe it's time we both stop hiding." They stood there in silence, side by side as the wind carried the scent of rain and hope, and though neither spoke the words aloud, both understood that this was not the end of their story, but the beginning of something far greater. A love tested by truth, strengthened by trust, and destined to change not just their lives but the lives of everyone who dared to believe that the heart, no matter how shy or wounded, could still find its way home. The days that followed the storm were painted in quiet tones, soft mornings and long evenings that carried a new kind of peace. After the chaos of headlines and judgment, the world finally began to settle. The truth had spoken louder than rumor, and in that calm both Natalie and Julian learned what it meant to stand together when everything tried to pull them apart. The community center bloomed with new life, donations arriving from people moved by their story, children laughing louder, walls brighter. It was as if the universe had rewarded courage with color. Natalie worked harder than ever, yet now there was a lightness to her step, the kind that comes when a heart stops running from its own truth. Julian visited often, sometimes with nothing more than coffee and silence, sometimes to watch her teach, other times simply to sit near her while the children painted. Neither of them spoke about love, but it was there in the space between breaths, in the way their eyes found each other across a crowded room, in the way she smiled when she caught him watching her. He no longer needed grand gestures, and she no longer feared the difference in their worlds, for what they shared had already proved stronger than distance, stronger than pride, stronger than fear. One afternoon, near the end of spring, the sky turned heavy with the promise of rain. The children had gone home, the paint tables were cleared, and Natalie stood by the window watching dark clouds roll over the city. She heard his footsteps before she saw him, that familiar steady rhythm that had somehow become a part of her world. "You came early," she said. Turning with a small smile, he nodded, his eyes soft. "I couldn't stay away." He walked toward her, pausing only when they were a breath apart. "I used to think love was weakness," he said quietly. "But you showed me it's the only thing that makes strength mean something." She felt the words wrap around her like warmth. "And I used to think people like you lived in stories. Unreachable, untouchable," she whispered. "But then you proved that even in the highest towers, hearts still beat the same." The rain began to fall. Tapping softly against the windows, he reached for her hand, their fingers fitting together with the ease of something long meant to happen. "Natalie," he said, his voice trembling just slightly, "for months I've been trying to find the right words, but every time I see you, they disappear. So tonight I'll stop searching and simply tell the truth. I love you, not because you changed my world, but because you reminded me that I still have one." Tears welled in her eyes, not of sadness but of release, all the fear, all the hesitation, all the what-ifs dissolving in that moment. She took a slow breath and stepped closer, her free hand resting lightly against his chest, feeling the steady beat beneath. "You waited a long time to say that," she murmured. "I was afraid," he admitted, "of losing control, of being vulnerable, of you walking away." She smiled through her tears. "You never needed control to keep me here. Outside, thunder rolled, the lights flickered, and the world seemed to pause to listen as two hearts finally spoke the language they had both been learning in silence. He drew her into his arms, and though neither said another word, the quiet between them was filled with everything that mattered: forgiveness, trust, and the gentle courage of love that had survived every test. When the storm passed, they stepped outside into streets washed clean by rain. The city shimmered under lamplight, reflections dancing on puddles. They walked together without destination, just letting the night hold them. At one corner, children's paintings from the exhibition were still displayed in a shop window. Bright suns and open skies, one drawing showing two figures holding hands beneath a rainbow. Natalie laughed softly. They saw it before we did. He smiled. Children always do. As the months turned, their bond only deepened. Julian began integrating art programs into every Cross Hotel property, naming them after the children who inspired him, and Natalie became the creative director of the foundation. Traveling with him, teaching, building, healing. Together they transformed what had once been business into something that touched lives, not with wealth but with heart. The world that once questioned them now celebrated them. But fame meant little compared to the quiet joy of ordinary mornings. Coffee shared before sunrise, paint stains on her fingers and ink on his sleeves, laughter echoing through rooms that once knew only silence. Years later, on the anniversary of the exhibition that changed everything, they returned to the same gallery, now filled with new generations of artists. The children from the old days had grown, some teaching, some volunteering. The walls glowed with colors of hope. At the center hung a single framed painting, the one of two faceless figures reaching toward light. Beneath it a plaque read, "For everyone who learns that love is not found in perfection, but in honesty." Natalie stood before it, her hand resting gently on the frame. "Do you ever think about how it all started?" she asked softly. He smiled. "A mistake, a borrowed blazer. A frightened girl who walked into the wrong office and somehow found the right person." She laughed. "Fate does have a strange sense of humor." He turned to her then, his expression tender. "No, fate just needed you to show up." She looked at him, eyes shining. "And you to open the door." For a moment the crowd around them disappeared. Time folded into memory, and they were once again those same two people standing before the window of a skyscraper, one scared to belong, the other scared to feel, now bound forever by the very thing they both feared: love. As the night drew to a close and the lights dimmed, they stepped outside hand in hand, the city humming softly below. Natalie looked up at the stars, her voice barely a whisper. "Do you think love changes the world?" He thought for a moment, then answered, "No, love changes us. And then we change the world." She smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Then I think we've already begun." And so their story, born of a mistake, forged through storms and sealed by truth, became not just a tale of romance but of redemption, a reminder that sometimes the shy heart carries the loudest strength, that honesty can build bridges between impossible worlds, and that love, when it finally speaks, does not whisper. It transforms everything it touches.